Welcome to the Marketing Guides for Small Business podcast. I'm Jen Kelly, your host today, and I'm joined by Ken, Ian, and Paul. And today we're discussing web analytics. And if you're wondering if your small business needs web analytics, I would ask, do you have a website? And if the answer is yes, then yes, you need web analytics. Now, in exploring those analytics can help you understand how your website's visitors behave once they're on your site, who your audience is, where they're from, how they found your site, and you can also see what your most popular content is and what might be driving people away. However, web analytics can feel confusing or overwhelming. So today we'll demystify the things a little bit to help you get started. We'll share what types of metrics to track, what they mean, and what tools you can use to help. So let's get started. With that, Ian, I'm going to start with you. First question, what is web analytics and what kind of information can web analytics tools help you track?
Sure. Let's demystify it. I'm gonna ask a question, or I'm gonna answer the question by first asking a question of our audience. I think you alluded to this, Jen, but as a business who's invested in building a great website, how can I know if my website is working? Right? Is my website actually attracting people? If my website is doing anything? Without analytics, you can't. Like, you're just guessing. Yes, you might get some phone calls. You can ask people, hey, were you on my website? Of course, but there's data driven capabilities that you're missing out on, and really you're just blindly guessing for the most part. So data analytics or web analytics can help you determine how your website is performing, and it can answer specific questions that you have, like how many people are coming to my website, um, where do those people live, where are they coming from geographically, what are the most popular pages, what blog content are they digesting. And it can also provide more in-depth information, like how did somebody get to my website? What channel did they come from? Was it paid traffic? Was it organic traffic? Was it social media traffic? All that kind of stuff. What marketing tactics are driving most traffic to my website? Is my website mobile friendly? How many visitors has my site converted into leads or customers? And web analytics reports show you what is working and where you can improve things. You can use the information gathered to improve your website, how it's working. There's even analytics tools that allow you to do heat map tracking. So when people come to your website, you can actually see where they're clicking. There's all sorts of analytics tools. The information you gain can increase your overall understanding of your business, of your customers, and provide you with insights about how your customers are coming to you, what marketing efforts are actually working, and help you make informed business decisions. So I look at it as, key business insights in the 21st century. Like, if you're investing in a website, you have to do analytics. If you're not, it's a huge miss on your part. And it's a huge miss if you hired someone to build your website and they didn't include some sort of analytics in it.
For the small business owners out there that are just hearing about this for the first time, when you say include analytics in it, is that a regular thing that should be expected from your web designer, your web development company?
Quite frankly, it should be.
Yeah.
It's not always. Like, it totally depends on the type of vendor or business or agency that you hire to build your website, because if they're entirely focused, like if their whole world, this is the vendor's world, if the whole vendor's world exists in turning out websites and that's where their profitability is made, they will not usually, there's always exceptions, but from my experience, they will not usually be worried or concerned about analytics. They actually don't care, because they've sold the website, they completed the project, they moved on.
Right.
It's the businesses that are actively involved in trying to help you grow your business, attract more leads. Those are the ones that are usually like, hey, you got to get analytics in it. We include that in our setup service. Once we build the website, we will connect it to an existing analytics platform if you already have one, or we'll set up a new one. But yeah, it really should be. And it's a key question I think businesses should be asking when they're having a website built is what happens after the website is built? Do you set it up in analytics? Is it a new analytics account, or will you connect it to my existing account? That kind of stuff is really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Good advice there. Absolutely. Ken, what type of metrics should a small business track? There's so many things to track. Are there a few that really matter that someone can get started with?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about four just to get started. First are user metrics. So this is really the who of who's coming to your website. It's how many total visits are you getting? How many unique visitors are you getting? Those kinds of things. So that can be really helpful, especially when you're looking at trends. Again, you need to factor in the seasonality of your business when you're looking at trends. But generally, you want to see that number going up in terms of both overall visits and unique visits, because that means that your website is probably becoming more findable, or you're finding better ways to drive traffic to your website. Then there are behavior metrics, and those are really based around it's the what, right? So it's like what pages are being visited, how long do people stay on a particular page, or how quickly do they leave, and what types of devices are people using to view your website. Then you start to get into some metrics that really measure where, like Ian talked about, where your traffic is coming from. So the referring sources, it could be from search engines, it could be from social media sites, other websites. If you're listed on business directories, including local chambers and things like that, then they can be identified as referring sources of traffic to your website. You want to pay attention to that, because that gives you the ability to maybe double down and focus your marketing efforts on, where you're getting the biggest bang for the buck. Or if you're not getting enough traffic, maybe you need to look at doing a paid ad strategy to get more people onto your website. If you're not ranking and the organic SEO isn't kicking in, or social media is not driving enough traffic to your website. And again, even if you're doing social media organically, for most businesses, you're probably, to get a lot of uplift from social media, you're going to have to do a lot of regular posting, and maybe even paid ads. But that's really the acquisition. And then you've got conversion. So this is, really to focus on how are people taking action on your website. Are they filling out forms? Are they hitting the landing pages that you want them to go to? And by landing page, I think this is a broad concept of a landing page. It's not the specific technical, web designer notion of a landing page. It could be, it may not, it doesn't have to be. But if they're hitting the right pages to take the actions that you want them to call, to fill out a form, if you've got e-commerce sites, are they making purchases, things like that. So really, it's ultimately the web conversion metrics, and these can be really tricky. And I'm sure Paul will have some stuff to say about this as well. But when you drive traffic from a paid source, or from SEO for that matter, you may not get an immediate conversion, right? I mean, you need to really think about this concept of assisted conversions and the whole path and the journey that people might take before they actually convert on your website. But you definitely want to see, are they actually converting from your website? Because it's super important. That's at the end of the day, we build websites largely because we want people to contact us, either call us, fill out a form, schedule a consultation, buy a product, whatever it is. So the web conversion metrics are really important to take a look at.
Great. And good segue to Paul. So Paul, what are some of the best web analytics tools you can use, in your opinion?
Well, we could probably do an entire podcast just on this. So I'll first of all, let's talk about the different types of tool. Everyone probably has heard of or knows about Google Analytics, but there's really three different types. There's the traditional analytics tools such as Google Analytics, and then there's behavior analytics tools, which I'll get into. I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds about any of this. But then there's the cookieless analytics tools, which is kind of what GA4 is for, because
What's GA4, Paul?
Google Analytics 4, as opposed to Universal Analytics, because Universal Analytics is more of a session-driven kind of tool that uses cookies to track what users do. Whereas Analytics 4, because of all the privacy, they're basically trying to get around the whole privacy thing. And when I say get around, I don't mean that in a bad way, but there's a lot of privacy issues out there and privacy laws that have been enacted. So they have to have a different way to track these things. And then, you have things like DuckDuckGo that the idea is to not track what you do on the web, which causes problems from an analytics standpoint. So the traditional analytics tools, I guess, would be Google Analytics, and you have Adobe Analytics, Mixpanel, Matomo, StatCounter, Yandex, which is the Russian search engine and the Russian version of Google Analytics, and Baidu Analytics, which is the Chinese version. And HubSpot has their own analytics tool. Most of these are paid versions, and they're really for larger companies, enterprise level, or, at the very least, the larger side of the medium-sized businesses. So for most small businesses, Google Analytics is what you're going to use. And it analyzes website traffic, bounce rate, traffic sources, things like that. And so like Mixpanel, for instance, it's free for up to 1,000 monthly users. So if you have more than 1,000 users on your website per month, you're gonna have to pay for it. But one thing it does track, or makes easier to track, is KPIs across websites and mobile apps. You don't have to separate them out. Matomo is really focused on measuring website traffic and user behavior, and beyond that, it's really difficult to use. So I won't go into any of that anymore. But if you want to get into the behavior analytics tools, then you're talking about things like Hotjar is a good one. And that's kind of a heat track. And there's other ones out there that has these heat maps where it will show you what people are doing, what they're clicking on, how far down they're scrolling. And there's kind of an overlap here. You can set some of these things up in your traditional analytics tools, but these behavior analytics tools, they just make it easier to do. It's built in. It's what they do. They're not going to track session views or bounce rate or the path through the website. They're going to say they scroll down this far, they clicked on this, their cursor hovered over this part longer than over this part. So it's going to kind of show you user behavior. And I'm trying not to get too deep into the woods with a lot of this stuff, but there's Hotjar, Crazy Egg. That's the one that Neil Patel developed. Everyone's heard of Neil Patel. And Hotjar is a different version of Crazy Egg. There's Lucky Orange, which is another one. the biggest reason you'd use these behavior analytics is to improve user experience.
Mm.
And that's where it helps you understand why they're doing certain things.
Yeah. You made a reference to a scenario where a user is on your website, sort of hovering over a certain area. What could that information tell the business owner? Is that a good thing, a bad thing, or what are some of the things that they could glean from that kind of behavior?
Well, that's a good question, because it really comes down to understanding and interpreting the data, which, we've talked in the past about bounce rate on analytics. Is it a valid metric? Well, it depends. In context, it's a valid metric, because if someone goes to your website because they want your phone number and then they call you, well, and then they leave, well, okay, but it served its purpose. Google Analytics is going to call that a bounce, but it served its purpose. So there's always flaws in the data. If someone goes to your website and they have their cursor over a certain area, and then the baby starts crying and they walk away, okay, that doesn't tell you much. But if they're on a certain area of a page, let's say they're on a blog post and they're hovering over a certain area and they're scrolling up and down, that can kind of tell you that they're reading or rereading that certain part of the blog post. So it really comes down to knowing how to understand and interpret the data. It kind of goes back, Ian was talking about the different data sets, and should analytics be included? And yes, it should, but my opinion is when you have to be very careful, because if you give your clients analytics reports and they don't understand that or know how to interpret it, you're going to get a lot of questions. We've had clients in the past that we've rebuilt websites for them, and their websites were just horrible and they were getting no traffic. And we rebuilt their website, and then they'll call us and say, we're getting all these irrelevant calls and form fills that we never got before. It's like, well, that's because no one could find you before. So, yes, you're getting these irritating, irrelevant calls, but the upside of that is you're actually ranking now, which you were not ranking before. So you have to understand the data and know how to interpret it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I think the most important thing out of that, Paul, is that we can extrapolate that anybody who hovers over a button too long has a baby. And that's a whole world of insights.
Or a puppy that's pissing on the carpet.
Well, actually, I mean, it can, there are two ways that you could interpret some of this stuff, right? I mean, so some of it, like Paul, you talked about, if somebody's reading a blog post and they keep going back and forth rereading that section, it's either telling you it's incredibly valuable and very helpful for them, or it's confusing. You don't really know. I mean, you have to look at all of this stuff in context to really start to make some sense out of this stuff.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because it doesn't tell you, like you just said, why they're scrolling up and down. Is it really valuable, or is it confusing and it needs to be rewritten? So I guess in that case, I'd maybe call some of your friends and say, hey, take a look at this, and does this make sense to you? Have someone, because when I write, and I'm not a writer, when I write an email, it makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I've often been told that sometimes I get too technical about things. So, so have someone else look at it and see if it makes sense to them. Someone not involved in that industry. So if you're writing a blog post on trenchless plumbing, have someone that knows nothing about that read that and say, does this make sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point there. Absolutely. Ian, just diving a bit deeper here, what would you say the best user metrics to track are, and what do they mean?
Yeah, so I'm trying very hard not to infringe on anybody else's questions coming up. I think there's going to be some crossover for sure. But
Yeah.
analytics platforms like Google Analytics allow you to do some incredibly deep diving into user metrics. But I find really, for me, my most used metrics reports in Google Analytics are a channel acquisition report, which Paul's going to talk a little bit more about later on. But the reason this is my most used report, and just to support what Paul and Ken talked about, in that you need to be really careful about how you share this information so that you're providing context. And so when we share analytics data, we're actually sharing it in a video where we're walking our clients through the results, because we find that's the best way to do it in order to share information and share insights. But the reason that channel acquisition report is the most important to us is because it quickly, in one snapshot, we're able to see how many users visited the website, how many of those were new users, how many total sessions, because a user can come back multiple times, what, meaning how many people arrived to the site and then immediately left. Where it's like pop-up, it's a game.
Really?
We're losing people and they're coming back.
Yeah.
The average pages per session, how many pages visitors are looking at, the average session duration, how long they're staying on the website. And most importantly, Ken covered this a little bit, but how many people took some sort of conversion action, the most important actions on the website, to both myself as the marketer and to the client. And those are usually phone calls and form fills, right? And or maybe like a demo setup. And the really cool thing is it will show me the breakdown of all of those metrics and where the people came from, which channel they came from, like Ken was talking about, the organic, the paid, the direct, the social. But I think if I were to say what makes those really, really powerful reports is that you can compare data. So it allows you to run a comparison, because here, just to give you some insight, so when you first open up Google Analytics, usually the standard dashboard is it's showing you the last 7 days. Now, if you're an e-commerce site, man, you got to keep your finger on the pulse of 7 days of what's happening on our website. Is it going up? Is it going down? Holy crap, we got to do something crazy to get traffic up or something. But for most businesses, you want to look at a broader term. So in other words, like, I determine what the time frame is that's most important to the client. What slice of data will help us understand what's happening? And so usually in monthly reporting, it's the last month, right? So what happened the last month, and what am I going to compare that with? Because again, if you're just looking at that month, yes, it tells you what happened in that month, but it actually doesn't give you insight. It doesn't really tell you, like, did we improve? Did we go down? So you have to compare the data. So in a tool like Google Analytics, you can say, I want to compare this data with the prior period, the prior month. And that's helpful. It gives you some more insights. But where I get really excited with clients, especially when we're working with them year over year over year, is to show year over year reports. Because when you compare September of this year versus September of last year, and maybe even when the year you first started working with them, you can show the dynamic change that you've created and that they've experienced in all of those metrics. And to me, that's the most powerful thing, because as Ken said, that takes away the seasonality.
Mhm.
Not every business has seasonality, but there's very few that don't experience some sort of seasonality. So, with a dentist, September is often a tough month because all the kids are going back to school. Families are totally focused on, just getting the kids to school and making sure lunches are made. They're not really focused on getting kids to the dentist and doing hygiene checkups and that kind of stuff. And so you see this seasonal drop. And of course, December for most businesses, you lose half the month oftentimes.
Sure.
Right? So when you do year over year reporting, it really takes away the seasonality. It shows you the amazing results, positive or negative.
Yeah.
And that helps you really understand what's happening.
What would you say if a business is just getting started, how long should they be comparing before they start to say, oh, is this a trend or not? Is it going to be a quarter? Is it really, do they have to really wait a year until they see what the trend is?
So yes, truthfully, you have to wait a year to see seasonal trending, right? But when you do your month over month report, you will definitely see, oh, this month is worse than last month. But it really causes you to ask questions in a vacuum because you don't always know what's impacting those numbers, right? Is it seasonality, or is there something else in play here that could be a technical issue, could be economic, whatever. So yes, so the way I look at it, Jen, is I always do the month over month reporting because you can gain some insight there. You zoom out to the quarter, you zoom out to the year, and then if you want to zoom out further, you can look at annual trending and stuff like that. It gives you all different types of insights at those different levels.
Good. And so just to go back to if they're just starting, don't get too excited about a blip up or a blip down in the first couple of months. Just take it as data. And,
well, I would say blip up, celebrate it, right? Because usually, if a company hasn't been investing in their website, in SEO, and now they're tracking it, and you can see some positive momentum, get excited about it, but don't be crushed if the next month you see some drops and stuff, because especially if it's a new presence, if it's new on, Google's recently indexed it, there can be all sorts of fluctuations. And of course, when Google creates an algorithmic change, there's fluctuations that happen across the marketplace that can affect you. But yeah, I always like to celebrate the small wins when you can, but yeah, temper it with, this is our first or second or third month, and let's keep the pedal to the metal and see what we can produce.
Yeah, good.
But the key thing is you've got to look at these things in context, because if you have that blip up, it could be because you're getting a lot of visitors from foreign countries that may not have the best of intent, who decided to hit your website a lot that month. So just because you see a spike up in, website visits doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. I mean, you have to look at and this is where analytics, I think, is very powerful, but it's also very dangerous for people, because it gives you a lot of false metrics. It gives you a lot of things that you think you should be excited about when really maybe they're warning signs that you have something that you need to be taking action for. And it's, everything's got to be looked at in context.
Yeah, that's
and we didn't really talk about when Paul was going through the tools, and it's probably because they're not technically an analytics tool, but even the analytics you can get from if you're doing Google ads or Facebook ads, like they have their own analytics built in there. And usually you marry those or mesh those with your Google Analytics to get a better picture. But even Google Search Console gives you a different perspective on how the Google search engine is viewing your website from an analytics perspective, because and even there, some of the metrics are a little confusing because they measure things slightly differently on the two tools, even though they're both Google. But as an agency, as someone helping businesses get more traffic, more conversions, I think all of us, we use those tools to understand, first of all, is Google, have they crawled our website? How does Google see the health of the website? Are there things that we can improve? And so I think that's where it intermeshes with the whole analytics discussion that can help you a lot.
Well, and Ian, that's a good point. Between analytics and Google Ads use different attribution models. So try explaining that to a client. They're never going to mesh. They're just not, because you can get it close, but they use different attribution models. So
what's attribution, Paul? Explain that.
It's how they attribute an action or an event. So by default, well, Google as it changes now, they use data driven attribution, but generally by default, AdWords would use the last click attribution model, whereas analytics, and going back to universal analytics, would use the first click attribution model. And you can change those, but even the last click attribution model in Google Analytics is different than the last click attribution model in Google Ads. So there's always going to be some disconnect between those data points, between those two tools.
Ken, talk to us about behavior metrics. What are some of the ideal ones to track, and what can they tell you? And if I could you explain them at the 101 level? Because I really want to make sure that the small business owners leave this podcast understanding some of the main things about analytics and just feel confident enough to get tracking on these things.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the first thing to look at in terms of behavior metrics is the most visited pages on your website. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it's going to be your homepage. Frequently, you might see the about page for certain businesses show up pretty prominently. But really, you want to take a look at like that second level, the next 3 to 4 pages that are showing up as the most visited. That can give you some really great insights. Are they the landing pages where you have your calls to action? Because ultimately what you should be doing when you design a website is everything should be driving people to some kind of a funnel to take some kind of action. So as an example, if, and this is really common, blog posts frequently show up as the most visited pages on a website. And it can be stunning. I mean, sometimes you can get a ridiculous amount of traffic to a blog post page that you wrote that just is staggering. And it's so much more than anything else. I mean, it just, these weird anomalies happen sometimes. But if you're getting most of your traffic to your blog posts and they're not going to pages that are actually focused on conversion, then you might want to think about, did I include a good, strong call to action on that blog post page to get people to schedule a consultation or place an order or whatever it might be that you're trying to accomplish? It's really common that that can happen. So take a look at that. One of my favorites is dwell time. Dwell time is kind of it's the average session duration. It's how long somebody hits your website and stays on your website. It can be really powerful. It helps you to really determine, is there value and usefulness that you're providing through your website? Are people going, spending time on your site? If they're doing that, that is a huge, massive signal to the search engines that people are finding your website is valuable, and that because they're finding it worth spending time on. We have short attention spans, and it's really easy for us to click off to another website, and that's a thing that you need to pay attention to as well. If you have links to external websites that aren't opening up in new windows, and you're taking people off your site, you may actually be harming yourself quite a bit. So you want to be paying attention to that. Paul talked about bounce rates. Bounce rates are really tricky, and they absolutely have to be looked at in context. If you're a water restoration company and somebody hits your landing page and they immediately leave, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because they may have literally just been going to that web page to look for your phone number because they have an emergency. They need to place that call and they're done. But in general, bounce rates, you want to take a look at those, because if all you're getting are quick bounce rates and you're not getting any good dwell time, when you look at those two things in context, then there's probably something going on with your website. Again, you have to kind of factor this across the nature of your business. Again, if you're a restaurant, where people are hungry, they're looking for a menu or they're looking for a phone number, and your menu is hosted by a third-party platform and you take them off site, you may expect to see high bounce times. So you have to look at all this stuff in context. I just can't stress that enough. And the thing that drives me nuts is that I think a lot of people, they get locked in and they're like, oh my God, look at this. And they just like Facebook likes, that is the most bogus stat on the planet. And there are the equivalent of Google Analytics, kinds of metrics that you're going to see, like, oh, look at all these users I got. Okay, well, half of them are coming from people who will never do business with you because they're not located within 5,000 miles of where you are, or even 500 miles.
Right. Yeah, and it's not a virtual service you offer.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So take a look at bounce time and or bounce rate and dwell time together, because that's going to help you maybe identify whether or not your website is confusing or not, potentially. And then the last thing that I would say in terms of behavior is device type. It's going to be really helpful for you to understand who are your ideal clients and what types of devices are they using to access your website. Whether it's desktop, mobile, or tablet, they're all three going to be categorized. For many businesses, mobile is going to be the largest set of users, but not every business that's going to pertain to. But you definitely want to take a look at that and pay attention to that, because, and especially now that Google has moved toward mobile first indexing, you can't ignore mobile, whether your clients are not using mobile to get to your website or not. You just can't ignore it because it's so important from an SEO perspective. But yeah, take a look at that. It gives you good understanding to see how how people, what devices they're actually using to get to your site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point. Great point. Second to last question today, I have it for Paul. What about acquisition and conversion metrics? Can you explain that and talk to us a little bit about those?
Well, acquisition, let's call that traffic sources for the sake of discussion. It's
Or
are
channels.
What's that?
Or channels.
Yeah, channels. It's where they're coming from, and are they finding you organically, as in from a search engine? Are they typing something into a search engine and then going to your website, or are they know who you are and they're going directly to your website, like yourdomain.com? Is it are they going to your Facebook page and then going to your website? Are they on a different website that has a link back to your website and they're clicking on that? That's, those are referral sources. So and that can tell you a lot. If most of your traffic is from paid ads, for instance, that's another channel, you might want to consider investing some time and money in SEO, because if you turn off those paid ads, you're going to lose most of your traffic. And so I'm not saying paid ads are a bad thing. I'm saying that if 80% of your traffic is coming from paid ads, you might want to consider doing something, because like I said, if you turn those paid ads off, you're going to lose 80% of your traffic. And that also means that you're probably not ranking well or organically. So, and conversion metrics, that comes down, it's first of all, what's a conversion? If you want people to sign up for your newsletter, okay, that could, and they do, that could be considered a conversion, but does that translate into dollars? Just because they sign up for your newsletter doesn't mean they're ever going to buy anything from you. So first of all, you have to define what is a conversion, and then how are you going to track that? If it's a form fill, did you set that up as an event in analytics, or are you tracking that through whatever platform you're using? Let's say you're using a particular form plugin on WordPress,
Yeah.
and you didn't set that up as an event or action in analytics. So the only way you know that is when someone actually submits a form. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can still track it. Just know that that's not going to show up in analytics.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other issue is tracking a button click on a form submission as opposed to sending them to a thank you page. I prefer to send them to a thank you page and track that, because let's say if you have required fields on a form and you're tracking the submit button click in analytics, if they don't fill out one of those required fields and they click the submit button in analytics, that's going to show up as an action or as an event, how you have it set up. So then they get an error on the form saying, well, you didn't fill out this required field. So then they go back and they fill it out and they click submit again. That's going to be tracked as 2 events in analytics. But it's really only one conversion.
Wow.
Or they're like, screw it, I'm not going to give you my phone number. It's a required field, and they abandon. You still are going to show that you got a conversion, but you really didn't.
Right. If they click that button.
Right.
I want to ask you a question about the acquisition. A little bit of a devil's advocate here, but would it be fair to say that looking at where your traffic comes from can be just the thing that takes some of the emotion out of where you decide to advertise? And what I mean by that is, I know we've talked in other episodes about some of our clients having very strong feelings either for or against, particularly certain social media sites, maybe certain places to advertise. But for example, if these analytics are showing, oh my goodness, Twitter's sending you a lot of traffic, and you actually hate Twitter, that that report might make you decide, you know what, I have to rethink this, because if that channel is getting me a lot of good traffic to my site, I have to, rethink my emotions around this site that's sending me all this good traffic. Is that kind of report the kind of thing that could help change a client's mind on that?
Well, Twitter is fine. It's Facebook that's pure evil.
Oh, I see. Okay. Here we go. Even within this group.
If you're a lifestyle type business, okay, and we've talked about this in the past, Facebook can be a great place. And yeah, that's a good point. If you don't if you have a personal issue with any social media platform, but for whatever reason that's sending you a lot of traffic, then yeah, you might want to advertise there. I mean, if you don't like Facebook, but for whatever reason you're getting a lot of traffic from Facebook, yeah, you might want to consider advertising there.
Yeah, absolutely. You could be literally leaving some money on the table.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just social media. I mean, it's every industry has niche websites. If it's home services, it could be Angie, it could be a variety of different ones. Yelp is a general purpose one, and a lot of people have really strong biases towards those websites. You should look at your analytics, because if you are getting quality traffic from those sources, then even if you're not paying for advertising, on certain platforms, you have that opportunity. Or again, talking about if you're a member of a chamber and the chamber website is sending you several referrals to your website, then they may tell you maybe it's worth doubling down and making a bigger investment with with that particular channel.
Yeah.
Yelp is another one that people have a love-hate relationship with. And and I get it, because in the past Yelp has done some things that irritate people, but in certain parts of the country, people use Yelp, and it is a huge platform. And if you're in that part of the country and you're getting traffic from Yelp, no matter how you feel about it, if you're getting traffic from Yelp and you ignore it because they pissed you off in the past or whatever, you could be missing a lot of business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. LinkedIn, Facebook. I mean, you name it. You can go down
Yeah.
the list. People have their biases. And, you know,
Mhm.
I mean, unless there's some ethical reason why you don't believe that you should be on a particular platform, you
Mhm.
should try to take the personal feelings out of it and look at the data.
Yeah, fair enough. I think this has been a great episode today, but I wanted to throw it out there. If there's any last thoughts or any last tips or topics that you guys want to make sure you get your 2 cents in.
Look at data in context and don't get hung up on one particular metric, I guess is what I'd say.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, I have. Go ahead, Ken.
Well, I was just going to say, I think looking at trends is much more important than looking at individual pieces of data that you might see displayed. So I love what Ian talked about, you know, month on month or year on year comparisons,
Yeah.
you know, but just look, I mean, in general, um, don't, don't fall for the shiny object, because a lot of the things that are going to show up in analytics reports, when you look at them, could look really great, but they're shiny objects. They're distractions. They're not telling you the whole real story. So
Yeah, and I had two kind of final thoughts, and this first one dovetails really well with what Ken was just talking about. We don't always look at it as an analytics tool, but for me and my clients, this is probably the gold standard intermeshing analytics tools, and that's call tracking and form tracking. We use a tool called CallRail. There's other ones out there. But the reason this is so valuable, Paul talked about attribution, being able to attribute an action to a channel, to efforts that you're doing. And there's nothing better that I've found than call tracking and form tracking, where it's able to say this actual form, this actual phone call came from this actual source, and they used these keywords, right? And then the sales team qualified this as a real lead. So that to me is the gold standard. It connects pretty much all the dots kind of at a higher level of reporting. And I think that's super important.
yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great point, Ian. And because, you know, at the end of the day, I think that's really the most critical thing that any business owner is making an investment in marketing is, are they getting calls or form submissions or purchases off their website from the efforts that they're making? And all of this other stuff can be a large rabbit hole that you could dig yourself in deep very quickly. And so that's a great high level summary, and probably the most important thing to look at.
Yeah, the call tracking, that's a good point, Ian, because we didn't really talk about that, because having different call tracking numbers for, because take Google Ads, for instance, you can put a call extension in there. I'm not going to get into that, but having a landing page with a call tracking number for Google Ads, because a lot of times you'll see people, they'll set up Google Ads and they'll just send them to the website, or they'll send them to a particular page on the website, but the phone number is the same across the website. So you don't know that they came there, that call came from Google Ads. Whereas if you have a dedicated landing page with a dedicated call tracking number, you know that, or you can be relatively certain, there's always flaws, but you can be relatively certain that that call came from Google Ads. Because a lot of times what people don't realize, the call extension, Google only tracks that unless you're importing your call tracking. Google only tracks that call if they actually click on that number from Google Ads. If they click on your ad and go to your website and call that phone number, that doesn't show up in Google Ads as a call. That's going to be your call tracking software. That's where that's going to be recorded, and that's why you have to have these separate call tracking numbers. Same thing with form fills. That's a really good point that you made.
It's kind of like layers of a pyramid, right? Where you're getting more and more precise information.
Yes.
The last tip I thought like that came to mind, and it's almost or more of a cautionary tale for business owners, that you should be the at least an administrator of your Google Analytics account. I've seen companies where we've won their business, we rebuild their website, we get into their or try to get into their analytics, and a staff member 5 years ago or an agency 5 years ago never gave them access to it,
or they just gave them view access.
Yeah, well, and a recent client that we took on, the agency had analytics built in. They had never invited the client to it. This was now years ago that they dismissed that agency. And if your account is stagnant for a certain period, Google just wipes it. So there was no historical data whatsoever. So anybody who, when we were talking about year over year, analytics and stuff like that, you lose all of that historical data and you're not able to benchmark. So it's a very simple thing, but whether it's you setting it up, whether it's an agency setting it up on your behalf, make sure, even several people in your business should become administrators on it. So that you never lose access.
Great. Good tips, guys. I think this is a good place to wrap up. So thank you for joining us today. Please like and share our podcast. Please subscribe to it and help us get the word out. Tell a fellow business owner about this show. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next week.